Call of Duty Finest Hour is the first of a few past-gen tie-in games to the main Call of Duty game series. This game is specifically notable for being the first time that gamers were able to play this series on home consoles, and would be a big part in moving forward the series into world domination in the gaming scene. Call of Duty Finest Hour was a game developed by Spark Unlimited, a group of developers who worked on the Medal of Honor series for EA before working on other games like Turning Point, an alternative history game showing what would have happened if the Axis powers took over Europe completely, Lost Planet, and Yaiba Ninja Gaiden 3. The studio would eventually close in 2015, but due to similarities between this game and Medal of Honor, EA would sue Activision over the game's similarities to their series, which would cause the game to have a budget that well ballooned its initial $2 million budget to around $8 million, canceling an expansion pack sequel Spark Unlimited had planned called Call of Duty Combined Forces, and ending the young studio's relationship with Activision. The game would come out in November of 2004 and would be put on the three major home consoles at the time, Xbox, PlayStation 2, and GameCube, with Exact Entertainment, a studio that would often port games, creating the GameCube conversion. The game is divided into three campaigns that are all loosely connected, not too dissimilar to how the original game did. However, it follows a completely new story. The Soviet campaign follows the Soviets, obviously, as they try to liberate and defend the major city of Stalingrad, a tough battle for both Soviets and Germans that led to Soviet victory. The shortest British campaign follows Edward Carlisle, a soldier making his way through a series of battles in Matmata, in Tunisia, Africa, to save Sergeant D. Hart. Finally, you have the American campaign following Sergeant Chuck Walter during the Battle of Aachen in Aachen, Germany, climaxing with the army taking hold and being able to pass through this city. Call of Duty Finest Hour is a game that surprisingly adapted well to the hardware of home consoles when compared to PC, and is a solid approximation of the control style that the series still uses to this day. Moment-to-moment gameplay works much better than Call of Duty Classic on Xbox, being actually built for the hardware and not being a slapdash port of the game for the home market. The game adds things like aim assist that can kind of compensate for the sluggish camera movement speed, and as you expect from a Call of Duty game, a number of different weapons are available, from machine guns, sniper rifles, and plain rifles. The machine guns are good for standard levels, with standard rifles not being totally tiered out, firing pretty quickly and working well enough for the campaign when you burn through your machine gun ammunition. Ammo packs are still fairly few and far between, so switching between weapons and scavenging for new weapons will be essential. If you're in a smaller space packed with enemies, the machine gun's usually ideal, where if you're in a larger space, the rifle is typically the adequate choice. The grenades in this game are wildly jank and barely work, though crouching will also be essential. The dumb NPCs have a much harder time of hitting you, even if you're just in the open, if you hunch over. So most of the time, if you just remain crouched, the NPCs are pretty much beat. The sniper rifle is also pretty useful at long ranges, especially since you can kind of cheese it and find places to hide out of the numerous, if dumb, NPCs' range. That said, this game, like the original PC equivalent, uses health packs, which again are a bit too few and too far between, and while checkpoints are placed better than the main game's console port to make a more fair feeling campaign, it's still not great, with the checkpoints being more and more spaced out as you navigate through the game. There are just some moments that feel a bit padded for runtime with unfair feeling challenge. The biggest example of this was the mission Defend the Factory. This is the fourth part of the Soviet campaign, and the game forces you to defend a factory from invading troops for 10 minutes. However, while there's generous health drops throughout this stage, you constantly have to fire and stay out of fire for a grueling 10 minutes while also defending a payload, meaning you have to consistently be in the line of fire. If you are killed or the factory is taken, you lose and have to restart the whole mission. It wasn't uncommon to make it 7 or 8 minutes and have to restart because somebody gets through into the factory, or you get shot dead because you're defending too relentlessly. It was very hard too, with the heavy fire and numerous kinds of fire, constantly having to switch weapons and leave the attack zone for health packs, leading them to do a solid advanced on you since your NPCs are just about as useless as the enemy NPCs. I don't think this would have been so bad, and I understand why they made you restart from the start of the battle to not lead to an accidental soft lock or near impossible win condition, but 10 minutes is a long fucking time for an arcade shooter, and especially one that makes you run across an entire map area before you could heal. The game featured a few tank missions, which are hard if you actually try to do them for real, but fear not, you can pretty easily just drive forward objective point to objective point and blow up one or two things, then keep moving forward. The game feels a little unbalanced in ways. Some missions are way too easy and you'll blow through them in 3 to 5 minutes. Others are way too hard and way too long. And with the solution to the harder tank missions being pretty much, well, bum rush it, it doesn't exactly bode well on the actual quality of the game's mission design. It's worth noting the levels that actually strike a proper balance, though few, are actually pretty fun. The combat may be dated by today's standards, but the controls are easy to understand and are mostly immersive. In these levels, you feel progress and even strategize how to take down the numerous NPCs standing in your path, and while the NPCs are dumb as shit, they also detect you pretty much the second you're within range, which is kind of a blessing and a curse. While they're easy to dodge, there is also no semblance of stealth in the gameplay here, which gets a little frustrating when overwhelmed by dozens of adversaries, occasionally with very little cover. Depot Saboteurs was also bullshit. The end of the mission sees an endlessly responding batch of troopers, no health packs, and a giant open stretch you're forced to rush before new soldiers spawn to get you. Honestly, I just fucking cheated on this level. I threw on a cheat code. That isn't something I will be able to do going further very much, but honestly, I love that I can just do that in this game. It was such a staple of my childhood to flip on the extra health or ammo cheats, especially when something this bullshit comes out. And if it makes the game more tolerable when it gets really bullshit, that's fine. Call me a hack, but I fucking cheated. I didn't want to play this game any longer. Graphically, the game is pretty much what you'd expect from a game of this style in the PS2, GameCube, Xbox era. I played the PS2 and the graphics were fine. It's a bit muddy and nothing too impressive, but at the same time it's fairly clear and the graphics aren't abysmal. I could tell enemies from the land pretty easy and everyone had a pretty clear silhouette. Though remember, this game was made by a small up-and-coming studio and was done on a relatively shoestring budget, attempting to match the scale of the original game on totally different hardware and made it work on a few different consoles. So it isn't as impressive from a textures and look front as exclusives like Halo, Jak and Daxter, or Mario Sunshine, but it was also made as a quick and broad approximation of the true experience that players could have on PC, with the mainline games not being pulled over to home console till the next mainline sequel in Call of Duty 2, with Call of Duty 1 not being ported until years later, which we talked about in my previous Call of Duty video. The game definitely has some small technical bugs, but most of the real bullshit moments are more in the bad game design category than actual game-breaking bug category. And while at times I felt very invested in the game, I would always eventually hit a wall where I couldn't hide, since you're always immediately detected, you were surrounded, and knew full well you weren't going to get to a checkpoint anytime soon, making you more happy beating a mission just to be done with the segment and get on to another part of this game than the enjoyment you actually got from the mission itself. The game can only be described as bullshit and often incredibly unfun. The music's a bit generic in this game, just your standard drum-heavy war marches on the menus, with the game largely only throwing in some musical cues during dramatic action moments, though it's not bad, just very peripheral. I really don't have much more to add. This game, while notable for being the birth of Call of Duty on home consoles, also feels a bit like shovelware, honestly. The NPCs may be dumb, but at the same time the game has a way of making you tediously fight dozens of them per checkpoint. Crouching may be busted to an extent, but a grenade at your feet will kill you anyways. A mechanic that works so well for the NPCs and never works for you, unless you A, throw it in a completely confined space, then B, get lucky and have it not explode on you, and manage to actually kill somebody. It's a game that perhaps due to the passage of time aged out of its own worth as a video game. Better, more exciting, fair, and clean experiences later became the standard for Call of Duty a few years later, and despite this series being a bit of a mixed bag, they are at least, in general, more playable than this entry in the series, which I don't really like, despite giving the developers at Spark Unlimited a bit of props given the limited budget they were given to create an interpretation of this series for the console market. Upon its release, the game reviewed alright on Metacritic, with the game in the mid-70s for a score across its 3 ports. The game also sold very well, being in the top 50 sales on the PS2, selling around 1.2 million units. So while it wasn't the best game ever, it at the very least was a bit ahead of its time from a control standpoint, and sold well enough to start driving some brand recognition to Call of Duty before the utter domination the series would see in the 7th generation of home consoles coming up in the next few years.